You know things are getting spicy in Canadian politics when provinces start beefing over whiskey. Not healthcare, not pipelines, not transfer payments. Whiskey. Doug Ford just declared war on Crown Royal, and now Quebec and Manitoba are lining up to tell him he's lost his mind. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where today we're diving into the most Canadian controversy of 2026, an interprovincial liquor battle that has more drama than a reality TV show. We've got premiers throwing shade, finance ministers clutching their pearls about supply chains, and 200 workers caught in the middle while politicians argue about whether revenge banning booze is good governance or just theatre. Spoiler alert, it's definitely theatre, but the consequences are very real. So pour yourself a drink, maybe not Crown Royal if you live in Ontario, and let's get into why Canada's liquor cabinet just became a war zone. Let's set the scene. Diageo, the British booze behemoth that owns Crown Royal, just dropped a bomb on Amherstburg, Ontario. They are shutting down their bottling plant near Windsor, wiping out about 200 union jobs in the process, and calling it a day next month. Now, if you're Doug Ford, this isn't just bad news. This is a personal insult. These are Ontario jobs, Ontario workers, and a facility that's been part of the community for decades. So Ford did what Ford does best. He went nuclear. He announced that Ontario would be yanking Crown Royal off the shelves of every LCBO store in the province. No warning, no negotiation, just straight-up bannination. And before you could say bottoms up, Manitoba and Quebec started lighting up his phone like angry exes. Manitoba was first out of the gate, raising red flags about how this ban could hurt their workers. Because here's the plot twist that makes this whole thing messy. Crown Royal isn't just made in Amherstburg. There's also a distillery in Gimli, Manitoba, and another facility in Valleyfield, Quebec. So when Ford bans Crown Royal to punish Diageo for closing the Ontario plant, he's accidentally punching workers in two other provinces right in the economic gut. It's like trying to key someone's car and accidentally keying your neighbor's ride too. Manitoba said hold up, we've got workers who depend on this. And now Quebec has entered the chat, with Finance Minister Eric Girard dropping the most politely devastating criticism you'll hear all week. Girard basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, Doug, buddy, now is not the time for measures that weaken Canadian supply chains. Which in Quebec political speak translates to what on earth are you thinking? And he's not wrong. We've spent the last few years watching supply chains crumble like a stale Timbits. The pandemic exposed how fragile everything is, from computer chips to toilet paper. We've been scrambling to rebuild, to make things more resilient, to support domestic production. And here comes Ford with a ban hammer, smashing a Canadian product made by Canadian workers because he's mad at a British corporation. It's the political equivalent of burning down your house to kill a spider. But let's be fair to Ford for a second, because his anger isn't coming from nowhere. Diageo absolutely did Ontario dirty. They had a profitable operation in Amherstburg, good workers, strong community ties, and they just decided to pack up and bounce. No real warning, no effort to save the jobs, just a cold corporate calculation that it would be cheaper to consolidate production elsewhere. And the workers? They get a pink slip and a thank you for your service. That stings. That's the kind of thing that makes communities angry, that makes politicians want to do something, anything, to show they're fighting back. Ford's base loves this stuff. They see a premier willing to stand up to big corporations, willing to say if you abandon Ontario, we'll abandon you right back. It plays well at rallies, it gets applause lines, and it makes Ford look like a fighter. The problem is, fighting back against Diageo by banning Crown Royal is like trying to punch someone and hitting your own reflection. You feel tough for a second, then you realize you just broke your hand in the mirror. Those 200 jobs in Amherstburg are already gone. The plant is closing whether Ontario sells Crown Royal or not. Ford's ban doesn't save a single job. It's purely symbolic. It's a statement, a middle finger to Diageo, a way of saying we won't forget this. But symbols have consequences, and in this case, the consequences are landing on workers in Manitoba and Quebec who had absolutely nothing to do with the Amherstburg closure. Think about it from their perspective. You're working at the Gimli distillery or the Valleyfield facility, doing your job, supporting your family, and suddenly Ontario, the biggest market in Canada, bans your product. Not because you did anything wrong, not because the product is bad, but because your employer made a decision you had no control over. And now your job security is on the line because a premier in a different province decided to make a point. That's why Manitoba and Quebec are pushing back. They're not defending Diageo. Nobody's shedding tears for a multinational corporation with shareholders and executives who'll be just fine. They're defending their workers, the people who are about to get collateral damaged by a policy that was supposed to be about solidarity. And let's talk about the supply chain angle, because Girard is absolutely right to bring it up. Canada's economy depends on goods and services flowing smoothly across provincial borders. We're not 10 separate countries, we're a federation. When you buy something in Ontario that's made in Quebec, or vice versa, that's how the system is supposed to work. We strengthen each other, we create jobs for each other, we build a national economy that's bigger than the sum of its parts. But when provinces start using their market power to ban products from other provinces, even indirectly, it breaks the whole model. It creates uncertainty, it discourages investment, and it sends a message that Canada isn't really one economic unit, it's just a bunch of regions that might turn on each other at any moment. Imagine if every province started doing this. Alberta bans products from provinces that oppose pipelines. BC bans products from provinces that don't meet their environmental standards. Quebec bans products from provinces that criticize Bill 21. It would be chaos. It would be the end of free trade within Canada, which is supposed to be one of the fundamental principles of Confederation. Now, Ford would probably argue that's not what he's doing. He's not banning Crown Royal because it's made in Manitoba or Quebec. He's banning it because Diageo closed a plant in Ontario. But the effect is the same. Workers in other provinces suffer, and the precedent it sets is dangerous. Here's another wrinkle. The LCBO isn't just any store. It's a government monopoly. In Ontario, if you want to buy liquor, you go to the LCBO or one of its licensed partners. There's no free market, no competition, just a government-controlled system that decides what you can and can't buy. And Ford is using that monopoly power to make a political statement. Now, some people would say that's exactly what government monopolies should do: promote local interests, support workers, make decisions based on more than just profit. But others would say it's a dangerous abuse of power. If the government can ban products because they're mad at a corporation, what else can they ban? Where's the line? And more importantly, who decides? Let's also acknowledge the sheer Canadianness of this whole situation. We're not fighting over oil or territory or military bases. We're fighting over whiskey. Specifically, Crown Royal, which is basically Liquid Canada. It's one of the most iconic Canadian brands on the planet. People from Texas to Tokyo recognize that purple bag. It's up there with hockey and poutine in terms of cultural exports. And now we've got provinces squabbling over whether it should be sold in Ontario. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so economically concerning. It's like if Switzerland banned Swiss cheese because one factory closed. It just doesn't make sense. So what's the solution here? Ford could back down, admit that the ban creates more problems than it solves, and find another way to pressure Diageo. Maybe he could work with the federal government to create policies that make it harder for companies to just abandon communities. Maybe he could offer tax incentives for companies that commit to long-term operations in Ontario. Maybe he could actually talk to Manitoba and Quebec and come up with a joint strategy that holds Diageo accountable without punishing other Canadian workers. But backing down doesn't fit Ford's brand. He's built his career on being the guy who doesn't back down, who fights for Ontario no matter what, who doesn't care what the critics say. Reversing the ban would look like weakness, and Ford hates looking weak. On the flip side, Manitoba and Quebec could just shrug and say it's Ontario's problem. But they can't, because it's not just Ontario's problem. It's their workers' problem. If Crown Royal sales tank because the biggest market in Canada won't sell it, Diageo might decide to close more facilities. And guess which ones would be on the chopping block? Exactly. So Manitoba and Quebec have to speak up, have to push back, have to make sure Ford understands that his symbolic gesture has real-world consequences for real people. And that's exactly what they're doing. The federal government could step in here, and maybe they should. Interprovincial trade is technically a federal responsibility. The federal government is supposed to make sure goods can flow freely across provincial borders, that provinces don't erect trade barriers, that Canada actually functions as one economic unit. But getting involved in a provincial liquor dispute is politically tricky. Mark Carney's already got enough on his plate without jumping into a fight between Doug Ford and two other provinces over whiskey. But if this escalates, if more provinces start using their market power to punish each other, the feds might have no choice but to intervene. Here's what really gets me about this whole situation. Everyone involved is technically right. Ford is right that Diageo treated Ontario badly and that politicians should stand up for workers. Manitoba and Quebec are right that the ban hurts their workers and weakens Canadian supply chains. Girard is right that now is a terrible time to be creating interprovincial trade friction. They're all right, and they're all wrong, because the policy itself is a mess. It's a policy that makes sense emotionally but falls apart practically. It satisfies Ford's base but alienates other provinces. It punishes Diageo but also punishes Canadian workers who had nothing to do with the decision. And let's be real, Diageo is probably fine with all of this. They're a global company with operations in dozens of countries. Losing shelf space in Ontario stings a bit, sure, but it's not going to sink them. They'll sell Crown Royal in every other province, in the US, in Europe, in Asia. They'll survive. The people who won't survive as easily are the workers. The 200 in Amherstburg who are losing their jobs. The workers in Gimli and Valleyfield who are now worried they might be next. Those are the people who actually pay the price for all of this political theatre. So here we are. Doug Ford banned Crown Royal to send a message to Diageo, and accidentally started a fight with Manitoba and Quebec. Eric Girard is warning about supply chain chaos. Workers across 3 provinces are wondering what happens next. And Canadian unity, already fragile on a good day, just took another hit over a bottle of whiskey. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's exactly the kind of story that proves Canadian politics is way more dramatic than anyone gives it credit for. If you want to keep up with all the chaos, and trust me, there's always more chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're posting videos every single day breaking down the latest news, the wildest political moves, and the stories that actually matter. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Is Ford right to ban Crown Royal, or is this just political grandstanding that hurts Canadian workers? Should other provinces retaliate? Let's get into it. Until next time, stay informed, stay sharp, and remember, in Canadian politics, even the booze comes with baggage. Cheers.